Great. Well, first of all, welcome to our inaugural Acquisition Workforce Subcommittee of the GSA Acquisition Policy Federal Advisory Committee, the FAC. So we are glad to be having our first meeting. I am the designated federal officer, and also my colleague, Stephanie, is here with me. Stephanie, you want to say hello real quick?
Hello, everyone.
All right. And so we have been starting this process. I wanted to say that the first thing is we are under the FACA process, the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And for those of you who are new to this process, we have a very well tested use process, which is about balancing membership on advisory committees here. In this case, we set up this committee to advise the GSA administrator. And also as part of the FACA process, we maintain objectivity and transparency, which is part of the tradition here that we use with federal advisory committees. The GAFAC was stood up in July of this year, and the administrator signed our charter, and we are focusing initially on regulatory policy and process changes as it relates to climate and sustainability in federal acquisition. So we have this wonderful opportunity to bring together a great mix of talents and abilities and skills and people that have really thought about these issues for some time from different perspectives. And one of the first things we did in our initial meeting was to establish 3 subcommittees. And so this is the Acquisition Workforce Subcommittee meeting today, our inaugural. And then we also established industry partnerships and policy practice, which will be meeting tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And so we're going to begin a cadence of meetings for the purpose of really digging into the important work ahead of us here. So the first thing I will do before I get too much further is to do a roll call here. And what I would like to do is to have each member, I want to make sure I can see you all here. Actually, if you just get off mute, and I'm just going to call the names just to make sure that we have a quorum, and then just say present or identify yourself real quickly. So Daryl Daniels, our chair.
Here.
All right. Nicole Darnard, our co-chair.
Here.
Great. Gail Bassett.
Present.
Mark Hayden. Mark, was that you? Okay. David Malone, I know David is going to be on travel. Ann Run.
Present.
Right. Steve Schooner. Christine Sieber.
Present.
And Clyde Thompson.
Present.
All right. So we have a quorum. And as you can see, the representation here is vast. So we're really looking forward to what's going to happen through this committee. So I want to go over quickly some ground rules before we get started, and I turn it over to Nicole and Daryl. As the Federal Advisory Committee Act committee here, just to remember, this is a meeting of the members of the subcommittee. We're going to have a couple of speakers, opportunity to hear from the speakers, and then members to interact with the speakers through Q&As. We're going to have a space at the end, towards the end of the meeting, where anyone else who is not on the subcommittee could chime in. They have comments, and we're going to pace that depending on how many folks are participating today. So these meetings are open to the public. The meeting is being recorded, and we're also going to post it on our website, our committee website, which happens to have subpages for each of the subcommittees. So the meeting today, as well as presentations, will be posted. So I just wanted to put that up front, and I'm just saying be respectful, meaning that, again, this is a meeting for the members of this subcommittee and for them to interact with the speakers as we go through this process. And then I just want to make sure that you can also offer comments via written comments. So we've provided the tools via our Federal Register notice. And actually, in this presentation, we have the links to the way to provide comments to regulations.gov. So I will just turn this over now to Nicole and Daryl to take us from here. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Nicole and Daryl, it's all yours.
Sure, thank you. And I don't know if everyone has the agenda. Is that something Is that part of your slides, Boris? Just the order of the agenda for today? If not, I can walk through it very quickly, which will include, remarks from Nicole and me, and then we will go through the workforce overview. We have some special speakers today, and the workforce sustainability guest speaker, and then we'll do some discussions, and then end the meeting with a quick overview of our mission and some public engagement, and then we'll adjourn. So that's really the order of the agenda for today. So again, welcome. Thank you to all of you who are participating as committee members for being here today, and also for the agendas. We got some work ahead of us as a committee. We've got to prepare an action plan for the committee of the whole. And as a subcommittee, we're going to be meeting every other week as outlined in the Federal Register. And that is an in-between time. We'll probably do some work just to get prepared for our various committee meetings. Listen, our work is really outlined by the administrator, in the appointment to the committee. And, is to look at best practices in the US and to evaluate, how the workforce can use clear objectives and criteria when they're making procurement decisions. And, overall, it is really just looking for success in developing tools and sets of priorities for the workforce. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. We're going to be hearing from a number of speakers over the next few weeks to help inform us so we can make independent decisions and recommendations to the committee that will be forwarded on to the GSA. With that, I'm going to ask the co-chair, Nicole, who is truly an expert in this field, to provide a little more insight into what we think the committee will be doing. Nicole?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to be really brief and just say I'm very excited to be working with you all. The work that we're going to be undertaking over the next 2 years is really important, and thinking about how to transition this workforce towards embedding sustainability and environmental considerations in federal acquisition is a tall task, but judging by the credentials of those who are serving on this committee, I think it's one that we can tackle head on. And I'm really, really looking forward to engaging with all of you in those conversations. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Anne, who is going to introduce our initial speaker.
Thank you, Nicole. I am delighted to introduce my old colleague and a good friend, Leslie Field. Leslie is one of the most known, respected, well-liked acquisition leaders in the federal government. And she worked her way up through the ranks from a contracting officer at Department of Transportation to a leader in the Office of Federal Procurement Policy for, gosh, Leslie, has it been 15 years or longer? As many of you know, the administrator of OFPP is nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And as such, it can be a very lengthy process. And Leslie has the vast majority of the time been put in the role of acting administrator. And we have determined that in her career at OFPP, she has been the longest serving administrator than any single presidential appointed and nominated administrator. So that is another way of saying she really is the backbone, the institutional knowledge, the heart and soul of OFPP. And I'm so grateful that she was able to join us very last minute, despite her super busy schedule. And there's nobody better to really give us the lay of the land and talking about really what does the acquisition workforce look today and what are some of the challenges. So thank you very much, Leslie.
Oh, Anne, thank you so much for that really, really warm welcome. I have to say that, we miss you so much here at OFPP. You're a wonderful administrator. and a dear friend. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. And I'm so glad to talk about the acquisition workforce. I came to OMB a million years ago to do acquisition workforce policy. There was a lot in the DoD space and not a lot in the civilian space. So, so when I came, 22 years ago, we really had our work cut out for us, and we've done a lot in this space. We've created the federal acquisition certification programs. We've gotten organized. We've gotten funding. We've got leadership. We actually have an associate administrator position here that's just dedicated to our workforce, and that's been incredibly important, I think, in our effort here. So everything we do at OFPP really focuses on how does this help the acquisition professional, what kind of resources, what kind of tools can we provide to help them do their jobs better. And they are really the most important part of the entire system, and their training, development, and support are critical to the success of all of our public policy priorities. So when you talk about sustainability, or you talk about economic competitiveness and all the things that this administration is interested in doing, the workforce really is the backbone for that. So what does the federal acquisition workforce look like? So in FY21, agencies spent over $630 billion through contracts for goods and services. Multi-millions of contracts were awarded by our contracting officers in more than 3,000 buying offices, with support from hundreds of thousands of program managers, contracting officers, representatives, and other acquisition professionals that support the whole system. So it's not just about the 1102 or contracting series, it's about everybody in that ecosystem that helps support them. And what does the workforce look like today? So Joni Newhart is our acquisition workforce associate administrator. So she's giving me these statistics, and they're always appalling every time I talk about them. So I'll share them with you. So there are 3 times as many people over the age of 60 as there are under 30. There are more people over 70 than there are under 25. And so we kind of summarize that to say that less than 7% of the acquisition workforce is under the age of 30. And so there is a pipeline recruitment issue here. It does reflect, I think, the larger federal workforce, but since we've got some tools at our disposal for the acquisition workforce, I think those numbers are really important. As of last September, there were just over 41,000 1102s, or contracting officers, contract specialists in the federal government. 66% of those come from DoD, and 34% come from civilian agencies. 54% of them are women, and 40% are minorities. And since 2017, we've increased the number of 1102s by about 8%. We certainly, I think, in the Obama years, tried to increase the number of 1102s since they've been kind of flat. So some agencies have done more than others, but overall, it's increased by about 8% since 2017. And the contracting workforce members transferring from one agency to another and also separating from the government has decreased by 25%. So that goes back to the 7% thing. So that just gives you some context about who we are, some of the scale and scope of the workforce. But what are we doing in order to support this critical workforce? So we are aligning with the new DoD contracting certification program that'll allow for parity between DoD and the civilian agencies. So when we had the federal acquisition certification program, which was great, it was a really great place to start. We've certified, I think, between 86 and 92% of the contracting folks. So that's been widely adopted and hugely successful, but it's time to look at it again. So we are looking at the DoD contracting certification program and aligning a little bit more closely. So you'll probably see some modernization there. The new program, which is not out yet, but I think a lot of folks are aware of it, reflects a new model of lifelong learning that reimagines how the federal government develops its workforce, and it shifts us from like a talent management system based on early career classroom training, where we all spent lots of time in the classroom to get to that FAC, level 3, to one that reflects better practices, I think, in modern learning, training agility, and continuous professional growth. So really more about credentialing, just-in-time training, apprenticeships, those kinds of things as you kind of go through your career. It does put the onus a little bit back on the agencies and the individual to figure out what that training plan looks like. But I think it'll give people a more dynamic set of classes and skills to achieve. So that's what you'll see in the modernization world. And it's really designed to attract more people into the workforce from a variety of sources. So from colleges, right? Industry, I think we've gotten a lot of comments from industry that they'd like to be able to come in and then go back out and figure out what that looks like. It also will help us attract internal candidates from other functions like financial management or other business functions, and then state and local government. I know Ann and I, a long time ago, we went to a NASPO meeting, National Association of State Procurement Officers. They're fantastic. It's a great organization, and they're very well organized, and they communicate and they collaborate a lot. We'd love to be able to bring in some of their talent and, you know, maybe send some of ours out for rotational assignments. So just bringing those communities closer together. We work really closely with the Federal Acquisition Institute at GSA, of course, to provide tools for the workforce. The periodic table of acquisition innovation, we're really pushing folks to be more innovative, more creative, less compliance oriented, and more creative. So that periodic table is a good knowledge management tool. So to the extent that we're building tools in the environmental space, we want to make sure that we put them there so that people can reuse them, they can ask questions about them, they can connect with people who are using them. The Buy American and Trade Agreements Decision Tool, the 1102 Experience Development Tool is also really great, and the Program Manager's Toolkit. So FAI's got a whole lot of resources. So, you know, as you guys undertake your work, you might want to take a peek at all that or hear from them. And of course, we connect with the community. That's the most important thing that we've done through a multitude of groups. We've got the Chief Acquisition Officers Council, Senior Procurement Execs. We now have a Deputy Senior Procurement Executives Forum. We have a Frontline Forum where we bring in our frontline contracting officers, and now with all our virtualization, we can bring them in from lots of other places. Our Acquisition Innovation Advocates Council, we've got an AIA, an Acquisition Innovation Advocate, in every large agency. So we bring them together. It's a really good and enthusiastic group. And of course, we've got industry liaisons based on our myth busting memo. So we've got all of those official groups, and then we've just launched, just within the last year and a half, a crowdsourcing platform to get lots of new perspectives and insights. So it's called OFPP Innovates. Cortina Smith on my team leads that, and we've had lots of engagements there, and we have unlimited potential to do other kinds of engagements in the crowdsourcing space. But we hear from frontline people, we hear from folks who are, you know, maybe not geographically near us. So that's been a really great tool. So, so all that to say is that we continue to focus on the workforce, and with all the new priorities, we want to make sure that we get we hear from them, that we get tools to them, that we evaluate how we're doing, how they're doing, so that we can be effective leaders in this space. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions, but just really excited that you guys are thinking about this. We're certainly doing a lot in the environmental space as well, to make sure that our program managers understand what the environmental considerations are, and working with our category managers, which Ann started the category management, which has just been a huge success, making sure that they understand what their responsibilities are in the environmental space as well. So lots going on. Happy to take your questions or feedback.
Leslie, that was such a great summary. Thank you. I took lots of good notes around. I think this subcommittee can leverage a lot of what you just talked about. Certainly, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. I love this frontline forum. What a great idea. I love the OFPP innovation. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
The crowdsourcing tool. So I think there's some things we can leverage. So look forward to future kind of work together on that space.
Yeah.
And I have a question. Leslie, you made the point that I think the goal is to get them to be more creative and less compliant oriented. Could you just give an example of what creativity looks like?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think we all get compliant, you know, we're used to that.
Yes, I have lots of checklists in all my old binders from, way back when, but on the innovation space, so the Department of Homeland Security was really the lead here. They've got a procurement innovation lab. If you get a moment to check it out, their annual report, I think they now call it a yearbook, gives you a great list of all of the innovative techniques that they've tried, the things that have worked, the things that haven't worked. I'll give you a couple of examples that I love. So the two-step down select, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but in a traditional procurement, the government puts out its requirements and then everybody scrambles to create volumes and volumes of proposals, right? So you got to read a lot of proposals, and it's expensive for the companies, it's expensive for the government too. So the two-step down select kind of breaks that phase into a couple of different parts. So we might have an interest in doing something, we ask for capability statements. So that's something that small businesses or large businesses have at the ready. So it's not a huge investment. Then we might take it to the next level and say, okay, well, could you give us like a 3-page summary of what you would propose in this particular space? And then based on that, if we didn't think a company had the potential to move forward, we might tell them they're welcome to continue, but we don't know that this is a good fit. And so that sort of winnows the field down a little bit, so people aren't spending unnecessary bid and proposal costs, and the government's not evaluating a lot of things that maybe won't get us the solution. So that's one way. I love that, and I think small businesses like that too, but that's one of my favorite things. The other, as the oral proposal and the sample task. So instead, again, of having a huge volume of what this company does and how they might propose it, you actually give them a sample task and you judge it. You have people come in and say, yeah, you know, you were really spot on. So then you can make it to the next gate, as it were. So there are some really interesting practices out there. And the funny thing too, and Anna will remember this, these are all existing authorities, but the FAR is huge. I don't have my I don't have my prop, but it's like 2,000 pages of fine print, right? And it's daunting. And you think, oh my gosh, I have to comply with everything in here. The fact is there's really a lot of flexibility built into it, but our job is to lift that up, to make sure that contracting officers knew what they could do. Like, here are the guardrails, but you've got all this space in here where you can operate, and we want them to do that. It also requires a lot of senior level cover for that, to make sure that, you know, if you make a mistake or, you know, something happens, that it's just part of the learning process. And, you know, I think that changed the narrative quite a bit. And so this innovation agenda it's shortened the cycle time. It's really reduced protests, the number of protests, because you've got sort of this continuous attention along the way. There are just some great practices. So that periodic table of acquisition innovation can showcase some of those things, but I think the Department of Homeland Security annual report or yearbook is another really, really great resource.
And I'm assuming the feedback from industry, the small businesses, is that this was very positive.
Absolutely. And in fact, DHS took the next step and actually created boot camp training for industry. So not just their workforce, they offered it to other civilian agencies, but then they also offered a version of the class to industry so that they could become more familiar. Because sometimes if you read the FAR and you're used to doing something the same way all the time, it seems like something's different or wrong or not right. But you know, when they hear it from government, like, it's okay to have one-on-one conversations. It's okay to do a videotape proposal. It's okay to submit a capability statement and ask us how do we even have a chance. But those are things that have really changed the face of acquisition. So I think, you know, in my long career, I think category management is the first thing that's changed how we do business. It's fundamentally changed the DNA, I think, of the acquisition function. And then I think the innovation is the next thing to do that, right? So I think those, and they go together. So I think it's really, really powerful.
Are there any other questions for Leslie before we move on?
Leslie, I have a quick question for you. You've identified a lot of resources. The bootcamp training, the Buy American decision tool, the periodic table. You mentioned, what I don't understand, are they all part of the FAI resources? Are they separate? Are they in different places? And what I'm wondering is whether there's a way that the committee might be able to get a summary of some of these resources.
Yeah, so FAI.gov should have sort of a list of all of those. I'll go take a peek at it, and if I see something missing there, I'll be sure to add it. Maybe I can send it to Anne just to make sure everybody gets access to it. But hopefully most of the resources are there, so you can take a peek. We'll be adding a couple of other tools in the equity space pretty soon, but But yeah, it's a great list of resources, and sometimes people forget that they're there, but they're important to the workforce. So we'll make sure you guys see that.
Great, thank you.
Well, Leslie, just very quickly, I think, you know, the key to this, the key to the success of this subcommittee is we stay focused, and, you know, we don't try to boil the ocean. And you don't have to answer this now, but I would love your thoughts on where to start or where to focus, and what you think would be most effective.
Let me
Yeah.
add to that, key pain points that the committee should be paying attention to from your point of view.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know that CEQ ran a sort of a project using the open opportunities space. They called like a day in a life of a contracting officer with respect to environmental thinking and sustainability and what they needed to do. And so I can connect you with the people at CEQ, but basically they got, I think, maybe a handful of contracting officers to explain to them where those pain points were, or where the blind spots were. Maybe not so much pain points, but blind spots.
This is Katie Newhouse.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And so that kind of gave, I think she felt, provided my conversation with her, she felt pretty good about having, and I think she's coming on.
I think, yeah, she's joining.
I think they're connecting that. So that kind of, you know, gave her a chance to talk to some of the contracting officers. So I think that's important. I think as we think about the credentialing and sort of the next generation of acquisition training, like what does that look like? So for some of the common contracts, we've got category management solutions. So, you know, you want the category managers and the leads at GSA or whoever's leading that category and at the agencies to understand kind of where the responsibility lies and what they should be thinking about in terms of sustainability for those acquisitions. For those that are outside the common goods and services, that's where you need to talk to program managers. And I know we've developed a course for program managers that talks to the environmental stewardship. But I think there's a lot in that credentialing, sort of the digi badges, those kinds of things that would be helpful as you all think about your work here, since we're moving in that direction. Yeah, I think those are a couple of things. I see Katie down there.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leslie.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions.
All right, and I'll connect with you a little bit later and see how
That sounds great, Leslie. We'll continue to stay
saying.
close with you. So
Okay.
appreciate it.
Okay. See you guys.
Thank you so
Have
much.
a good day.
Thanks.
And would you go ahead and introduce our speaker?
I would love to. I want to introduce Katie Newhouse, who is also a former colleague of mine, but this time from Amazon. Katie spent nearly 7 years at Amazon as a senior manager and in product management. And I love her tagline on LinkedIn. It's impact-driven product leader using technology to sustain the planet. And we're really fortunate in that Katie made a leap over into the federal government as Director for Sustainable Operations Supply Chain within the Council on Environmental Quality, within the Executive Office of the President. And she has done some great work in just a short amount of time in really trying to understand precisely what we're trying to get at. What are some of the challenges in the workforce and how do they operationalize sustainability into their daily work? And she and I connected a few weeks ago and had a great conversation, and she's got so much good information that I thought she'd be a perfect speaker to come present some of her findings to date for us. So thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thanks for having me, and really looking forward to connecting with this group and talk a little bit more about the Federal Sustainability Plan and workforce development and sustainable procurement and kind of the intersection between all those spaces. Looks like everyone can see the slides. And I'll just check with you on, I have 10 slides. So I was going to go over those, let's say 15 minutes. And I couldn't put everything I wanted to say on a slide, so I will kind of add more detail here and there. And then I'll open it up for discussion, Q&A. Does that sound?
Oh, that sounds
appropriate?
perfect. That sounds
Okay.
perfect. And if you know, just, I think we've got a nice chunk of time for you. So please don't feel rushed. And, you know, certainly if we're coming up to time, we'll let you know.
Okay, great. Just trying to move this one bubble here. Okay, there we go. Great. So the executive order that a lot of our work in the Office of the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer is under is 14057. And so this first slide and kind of the setup for what I wanted to share today is the different pillars that make up the Federal Sustainability Plan. And so we have all of these new targets, long-term 2050 targets, and then as well as some 2035 targets that we're working towards. And you can see the net zero emissions procurement by 2050 is one of those. But I think one of the things that our team talks about a lot is like, in order to procure carbon-free electricity, zero emission vehicles, and buildings, etc., like everyone who's doing that also needs to understand how to do procurement. And so it's very integrated into everything that we're doing throughout the Federal Sustainability Plan. Next slide, please. And then the other key message here is that we recognize that there are a lot of long-term goals, but that the 2020s are the decade for action. So we need to do all of this as soon as possible. And moving forward in this decade, we have some near-term things we need to get going on now. So you can see here that we're working towards having all light-duty purchases of zero-emission vehicles by 2027, a 65% goal by 2030, on and on. And then the two things that I'll highlight in the procurement area are supplier disclosure and buy clean. And you'll see a lot more on both of those items in future slides, but those are just two of the key initiatives that are under the procurement pillar. Let's go to the next one. So those are kind of the, let's call them roadshow slides that have been shared with many different stakeholder groups inside and outside of the government. These next few slides are ones that I just created and got approval for, so I'm excited to start actually sharing our work. So you can see here that achieving net zero procurement by 2050 will require action across our all of the federal government supply chains. And one of the strategic frameworks we started talking about quite a bit is represented here. So we've started talking about this as how we buy, who we buy from, and what we buy. And so within each of those three areas, we need to think about what are the levers, and those here are what regulations do we have or should we have, what guidance, what pilots, what's tools and resources, and then training, which is something I just heard Leslie talking about, and I think all of you will be looking into. So we have a plan and a strategy for kind of each of these areas, and kind of we're pulling these different levers in each of these different areas. And so I'll share a little bit more detail on that in the next slide. So this one has quite a bit of content, so I'll actually spend the most time on this slide. So as I said, there's the who we buy from, what we buy, and how we buy. So we're doing stuff in all those three areas. So first, the who we buy. So the main thing we're thinking about here is the proposed rule that came out within the last month And it's around supplier climate risk and resilience. And so what we've proposed is to require major federal suppliers to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions. And depending on how much money they get from the federal government in contracts, they'll have to report different amounts. So the largest federal suppliers will have to do scope 1, 2, and 3, and then major but not the largest will have to do just scope 1 and 2. And then also for that, the top tier, they're also required to report TCFD climate risk disclosures, as well as set science-based emissions reductions targets. So all 3 of those things are in this proposed rule. It's out for public comment right now. Maybe some of you have already seen that, but I think going to the workforce development, it's going to require us to make sure that our workforce knows what to do with that and how to incorporate that into the procurement processes. And I think one of the things I've talked about a lot with some of you and externally is like, okay, great, let's require this. As it's written, it's a rule that says in order to do business with the federal government, you must comply. And so at the end of the day, does the acquisition workforce really need to understand the ins and outs of each of these compliance schemes? Maybe not, but what do they need to know? And so really trying to think about what are the roles within the acquisition workforce? What do they need to know and why, and how to get the right people the right information as it relates to who we buy from. Then moving to what we buy, I think this is one that is super interesting because it's federal government's been doing this for a long time. We created a timeline slide for another presentation, and it's like 50 years ago. The federal government started requiring recycled content paper and kind of made the market for that. And then over the last 40, 50 years, different things, Energy Star, Water Sense, et cetera, have come up. And then now there's the EPA program that recommends different eco labels, and they have a whole framework for that. And right now they're out there's an FR notice, and they're going to be expanding that further and taking climate and sustainability into account as they think about the new categories that they're going to expand into. Sorry, I skipped over this first one. We also have an ongoing FAR case that is to relook at the part of the FAR that is around sustainable products and services. So part 23 is that section of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. And I think that is the reason behind that is that we have some new Biden-Harris policy that we want to integrate into that part of the FAR. And then, as I had on the previous slide, Buy Clean initiative is something that's new and is about prioritizing lower embodied carbon construction materials. So another opportunity that we felt like wasn't covered with just the eco labels, but because it's really a supply chain issue and it's not necessarily the product or service you're buying. You're often buying a building or the services to create a building, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get low embodied carbon cement, for example. And then this last one, which I did, someone sent me some notes from your kickoff meeting, and it sounded like someone suggested this or it came up in some way during that meeting, but this is something that's ongoing, and there's actually it's assigned to Leslie Field. So we are in process of reviewing our best-in-class solutions, those largest contracts under the category management program, to make sure that they have all the necessary clauses, because I do think this is the whole world of not only sustainable procurement, just procurement in general, like the FAR, the different requirements that are on the agency level as well. It's very complex. So what we're trying to do is bring in some subject matter experts from EPA to review these contracts, and then partner with the BIC owners, the best-in-class contract owners, to make sure that we're getting the right sustainable procurement clauses in there to make sure we have the maximum impact possible. And then this last one is kind of a new ambiguous frontier. So we had an advance notice of proposed rulemaking for this third FAR case here, which is minimizing the risk of climate change in federal acquisitions. And under this umbrella is the potential to use the social cost of greenhouse gases in procurement. And then, yeah, but I would say in terms of our discussion today, like as I've had discussions with people across the federal government, the number one concern is a lack of workforce readiness in order to go ahead and do that. And so been spending some time thinking about how we would go about doing that. And then this last one is about just extending not just the product and services, like which products are more eco-friendly, but actually getting into how we buy in terms of like, who are we buying from? Are there more than one supplier? Are we diversifying the supply chain? What are the major climate risks when we're getting going with any major acquisition? That's kind of the flavor of some of the things we're thinking through in minimizing the risk of climate change, this how section. Next slide, please. I think one thing that's always super helpful is that agencies are often ahead of anything we're doing government-wide. So we published the executive order in 2021, and a lot of agencies took the executive order and are taking actions today. And so as we get going with the things that are government-wide, we are trying to incorporate, learn from, and scale some of the things we're seeing happening across or in certain agencies. So here I have examples that are public about what the agencies are doing. So on the WHO side, DoD is working on some purchasing guidelines utilizing supplier GHG data. HHS launched a healthcare climate pledge, which I think is an interesting approach. So taking like a sector specific approach where they say, okay, all of our suppliers are all in the healthcare sector. Let's get them all to commit and raise the level of commitment as it relates to sustainability and climate. And then in the sustainable products and services section here, I highlighted some things about buy clean, and then also we are also thinking about PFAS as well as kind of areas that where one agency is kind of moving forward, and then we're learning, and then we'll roll out something government-wide. And then finally, on the minimizing the risks of climate change, there's buy clean stuff happening at DOT and EPA. And then these last two are also super important to the minimizing risk FAR case that I mentioned. So GSA has been for many years and is doing more and more today to require suppliers to incorporate climate risk management considerations into large contracts. But I would flag that as another workforce development opportunity. So Leslie just mentioned that program managers are being trained on how to think about climate risks as they go through the acquisition planning phase. And so what GSA is doing is requiring it as part of the post-award phase. And what GSA is starting to do is think about, okay, a year after award, when we start getting these climate risk plans back, how should the acquisition community evaluate those or potentially act on those, and providing the training and resources? That part is going to be really important. And it's something that GSA is already working on today. And then finally, DoD, they are working on, there's a contract, an RFP out right now, and they're planning to bring in a strategic climate sustainability and resilience contractor to help them with a lot of these things. And I think I would say one of the things that's in the RFP that caught my attention was about like hotspots and prioritization. And so with DoD just being such a massive organization, trying to understand where are those key areas that we need to think about both the climate risks and resilience aspects. One other thing I actually meant to bring up on the previous slide. So another area where all three of these things come together, which is a little bit outside of procurement, but is something in my portfolio that I thought would maybe relevant to this group, is the U.S. government Scope 3 reporting. So during the previous administration, we paused doing Scope 3 reporting, and we're planning to restart that reporting. The plan is next year. And so in that, the procurement part of it and the purchase goods and services, which is category 1 of Scope 3, is large, really large. And so what we're thinking right now is that we're going to be using a spend-based methodology, and then we'll move to more a hybrid methodology where we start using some of the supplier disclosure data down the line. And one of the things that we're also going to be working on with agencies is setting targets on Scope 3. And so then you could see that integrating with what we're talking about in terms of workforce development. So if an agency needs to reduce their Scope 3, the biggest Scope 3 categories, purchase goods and services, they need to determine, are they going to change who they buy from? Are they going to change what they're buying or how they're buying? And how do they actually move forward on Scope 3 reduction targets within the procurement processes? Next slide, please. This slide, in this slide, I just wanted to highlight kind of what we're all working on, which is this workforce development opportunity. And so there is a section in EO 14057 on engaging, educating, and training the federal workforce. And that's a big task. In order to meet the challenges of climate change and achieve all of these goals in the federal sustainability plan, there's a lot of different things to educate, engage on, and train on. And that's not just the procurement workforce, it's like the federal government workforce as a whole. So I wanted to call out that that is like a pillar in and of itself. One of my teammates is the lead for that work. And we had some ideas that were laid out in the EO, and we're going above and beyond and doing even more than that. Those things will be announced in the coming weeks and months. But I was going to take a little time to comment on what Anne mentioned, is that I also, as part of my process, onboarding process here, wanted to understand the workforce and understand who my customer was and the front lines of the federal workforce or federal procurement workforce. So I did take the time to do 15 interviews in the fall. And during that time, I interviewed them to understand kind of what they do on a day-to-day basis. What are their priorities? Where do they receive information? And then what's hardest about their work? How do they find out about new sustainable procurement policies and resources? And what's hard about incorporating those sustainability priorities into their day-to-day work? So through that, learned a lot. I came away with a lot of both opportunities as well as pain points and challenges. And per Anne's request, I did try to get a couple of those folks to be able to join today, and it was just a little bit too last minute. So I'm hopeful that if you all think it's helpful, I'd be happy to bring one or more of those folks to the next meeting, and so that they can share kind of the challenges as they see it. But a couple things I wanted to touch on is I think I heard that you guys were already talking about this with Leslie, is that like there's this opportunity challenge pain point around us looking a lot of the time to the contracting officer and putting all the requirements and the compliance the compliance requirements on the contracting officer, but actually there's a lot more groups and roles involved in the acquisition and procurement processes, and that a lot of times it's the people writing the requirements and the program managers and the CORs. There's all these other people that really what we need is for those people to be the ones that are trained, and that or doing what we need them to do for sustainability. So that was one thing that I wanted to share. And I think another thing that came out as like a pain point was the measurability of all of this and
Katie, just want to let you know we lost you for a bit.
It was at a critical point too.
Yes.
I wanted to hear the rest of that sentence. Perhaps we should use the time while she reconnects to discuss the rest of our agenda today, because we are running over. So one possibility is that we continue with the conversation. I think it's really useful, and reduce our focus on the priorities and move the priority conversation to next week. Maybe go straight to the mission statement, and it could be that we decide we don't want to tackle the mission statement until we discuss the priorities. But it seems like, because the mission statement's at a very high level, we might be able to tackle that one next.
I agree. And I think we, oh, is she back on?
Looks like
I'm
Katie-
yeah,
looks like
I'm
Katie's
back.
Okay,
we
good.
lost you- we
Sorry
lost you
about
for a
that.
little bit.
Katie,
Yeah.
you left us at a very, very critical point.
Suspense. Yeah, suspense. Okay.
Oh, I may have talked on after I lost you all. So anyone can tell me where you lost me?
You had just finished describing your first point, that there are likely opportunities that are higher up in the procurement conversation, in the contracting portion, where we have important levers that we can pull. It's not just about retraining the individuals making key day-to-day decisions. It goes much higher up. And then you moved on to your second point.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I have two more points. So what the second one was around a clear definition of success. What does it mean to do? Did you hear that? Like about
you just started that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And so well, actually what I was saying at the end is that, like, and I'll start with that because I think that's probably better this time since I get a second try. That like small business, it's like, I think it's 25%. 25% of the time you have to measure, you have to do small business, and that's very clear, measurable. It's there's a report that goes to Congress. There isn't that type of saliency here, and that is kind of a pain point, gap, opportunity. And then I think the third thing, well, let's see. I think that I'll say two more, is like shifts in administration priorities and the number of administration priorities. Like that, I think for me, being a sustainability professional, my stuff, this climate change is very important, but to these folks, they have so many different things. And so I think there is an opportunity to really like think about this as one of many things that they need to learn and be retrained on potentially. And how can we not have sustainability be over here? It's something that's just added on, but really integrated into the certification programs and other things that they already are doing as part of their day-to-day. And so, yeah, I think that's one that with an agency informal working group that I'm working with, like we're starting to think about that. It does seem like, there's all the trainings you have to do, and then these optional sustainability trainings that are tacked on at the end, for example. And similarly with some of the web resources, it's like contracting officers and program managers, they're getting their information over here, and then we have these great but separate sustainability resources. So like an integration opportunity is one thing that I've noticed in my past few months. So I'm just scanning through here. I did flag one resource that I'll share with Boris, and you may already be aware, but there is a Fed Center resource on sustainable acquisition training resources. So kind of the list of all the trainings today. And then going to the next slide. I just wanted to touch on a couple other things that our broader team is working on. So in order to train or do workforce development for the entire workforce, one of the other things we are doing is this federal sustainability speaker series. It actually, the monthly event just took place a couple hours ago. We had Lisa Jackson on, and have had various leaders from across the economy talk to the federal workforce in the past several months. And then the last slide, or second to last slide here, is touching on our kind of global public-private partnership aspect. And so here you can see President Biden announced the Greening Government Initiative a year ago, and then at COP26 COP27, we announced the Net Zero Government Initiative, and both GGI and the Net Zero Government Initiative were trying to incorporate procurement into those as well. And a lot of other governments are working or strive to work on the same things we're doing. And so trying to figure out how to convene, collaborate, standardize where it makes sense. And so it gets me thinking about this, the topic of this group as well as, you know, this is not a federal government problem specifically. Like a lot of private public sector entities are trying to figure out how to train their workforce on all of this. And so what does already exist out there that is being used by other entities that could potentially be leveraged? Like, I don't think we have to think of everything as bespoke. And so that was another thought on this one in terms of international collaboration. And then finally, we do have the federal sustainability plan online, the implementing instructions for the EO, and that has more detail on the workforce development section of the executive order. So with that, yeah, I'll turn it back to you all, and we can pull up the slides again if necessary. And would love to discuss with all of you.
My gosh.
Thank you,
So
Katie.
much.
Before we start, I wanted to just make a comment that wonderful, just because we are in the Federal Advisory Committee Act procedure, so the Q&A would only be with the members of the subcommittee. So just everyone else, just please be respectful of that. I just wanted to bring that up before we start. So again, open to the subcommittee members. Okay, and back to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. That was such great information. And I think a great foundation for this subcommittee as we think about both mission and where to focus. So there was a lot in there, but I'll start off some questions, but I don't want to monopolize the time. I'm sure the subcommittee has lots of questions. But one thing that struck me is that I really like the way you laid out the three sort of pillars around supplier emissions, products and services, and climate. As we think about areas to focus, how do I word this? Is one pillar sort of have more of an impact towards the ultimate end goal of the White House? And they're not all created equally. In other words, so like if we got the workforce completely fluent in how to buy green, sustainable products, is that going to have the same impact as if we really nailed the area of emissions? And it kind of ties to my second question, which is, if you think about product and service categories, certainly some of these pillars, I'm guessing that there's a large amount of spend within one or a few categories that impact these areas greatly. In other words, if we just focused on the purchase of vehicles, is that where we think we can have the most impact on emissions, or is it if we focus on another category?
Yeah. Great point. So
yeah,
let's see. So who we buy from, which is that supplier piece, and what we do think that what's in the proposed rule does have a large potential for impact. I think I'm going to skip over that one. Just
Sure.
since it's, yeah. But in terms of what we buy and how we buy, I think in the what we buy space, the products and services and getting the workforce fluent in that is important. And also it's existing. So I feel like the needs there are more incremental. So it's taking a look at the training and resources and workforce development activities today and modernizing.
So within the second pillar there.
The how we buy, yeah, the second pillar. The third pillar is new. So as I mentioned, GSA has done some great initial work on that. There's it's telling me my internet isn't stable. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. But I think that that's an area where it is, there's a lot of potential for impact and it's new. So there's definitely clear need there, is my point of view. And then to your second question, I am all about what you just said. And another thing, another thing I worked on in my first 6 months was doing kind of a heat map, trying to understand like, where do the emissions lie? Where do we need to focus? And so I do think that that's an approach that I think is great, and that and also thinking about maybe on the contract level, you could think of it. There's a lot of different ways to slice and dice that. Like who are the largest suppliers? What are the major categories? What are the major contracts? And trying and with the best in class contract review that is underway, that's all about prioritizing. And then I think HHS, their healthcare climate pledge thing, that's kind of a maybe if we were to replicate that in a couple more sectors, and that would be a good way of being like, okay, well, we're gonna 80-20 get the key sectors moving in the right direction, and that will have an outsized impact. And then the last comment I wanted to make was you did mention vehicles, and I think that has been an interesting tension, or good tension, in terms of like in the federal sustainability plan, there's now clear goals and mandates that we have to go and do this for vehicles, buildings, and carbon-free electricity. And so that is kind of creating basically a prioritization, like those are the first 3 things you have to go do. So I think to your point, yes, and those 3 areas are getting special attention and focus and training and resources. Like people on the CEQ office, the Chief Sustainability Officer team, are meeting with the people doing those procurements. So they're getting very bespoke training and workforce development, where we're meeting one-on-one and helping people get started on procuring those new things.
Thank you.
Katie, I'm wondering, the prospect of radically retraining the workforce, this is big. This transition is really big. I'm wondering, in your role in having spoken with the different folks in acquisition, whether you have seen some levers that could be pulled in certain places that don't necessarily require the large scale retraining, but are really important levers to pull as we get out of this gate. So for instance, automating the inclusion of specific sustainability language to be reviewed in RFPs. Are there other levers based on your position and the discussions that you've been having that you think are going to be vital as we move forward with our work? And let me maybe clarify this just a bit, that there are decisions that could be made at a higher level that make the work at a lower level easier, right?
Yeah.
So if we require RFPs to include FAR language before getting clearance to go into rfp.gov or sam.gov, then it makes the process of reviewing these things easier for for the folks at a lower level, have these conversations taken place within CEQ? Is there any wisdom that we could draw from you within this area?
I would say the last part of your question, I'm not aware of specific conversations that have taken place. So I guess what I only have are my own ideas. So I'm happy to share those. So I think one of the things that I've been struck by is the focus on climate literacy, and that everyone is across the federal government. People are spending a lot of time saying we need people to understand the problem and become literate about climate. And some of the content in the trainings are like, this is what a greenhouse gas emission is, and this is, you know, the science, which I am not opposed to, but to your point, Nicole, I do think it's super important to frame this conversation is like, what do people need to know to do their jobs, and not necessarily kind of that broad brush educating engagement around climate and sustainability. So I think that the levers then are, in my mind, are thinking about kind of the acquisition process and what are they doing when, and how to embed sustainability in those different areas. And then I think one other thought, I'm not sure this answers your question, is about kind of what I mentioned before, is about this kind of required versus optional training. I did hear from someone that the sustainability trainings are the most taken trainings of the optional trainings. And so like there's interest, but it's not required. And so trying to think about that as a lever, like by requiring it, what would be the signal and the change in the activities.
Thanks. I have another question, but I'm going to let someone else jump in.
Sure. I can jump in here. Hi, Katie, thank you. And that was a lot. And for me in particular. But something that really struck me is you talked about how it's not enough just to train the procurement professionals here and the acquisition, but it's the program managers and the other folks and kind of in that food chain. And that really makes a lot of sense. But I get the impression, because they're the ones who are kind of directing the program or the project, whereas the procurement professionals or the acquisition professionals, they are, you know, a lot of times just kind of going by the checklist in terms of what it is that we need to purchase. So how do we be impactful there with the broader community? Because I get the impression that community really needs more of this kind of understanding of the literacy, like, you know, the climate literacy and the work that you talked about. You know, I'm an architect, and I've seen over the last 20, 30 years how in the construction industry, there's been a lot of movement in environmental stuff and materials and industry, and you can actually select things that, you know, you look down the food chain of all the carbon impacts and this, that, and the other. But it's taken us quite a while to get here as design professionals, not to mention with the procurement people. So I'm wondering, how do we do this knowing that there's a whole group of folks before you get to the procurement professional who needs this climate literacy? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, no, I think that it's an important question, and I don't have a ton of knowledge about this, but what I do know is that there's a term called an integrated project team, an IPT, and that's used a lot in the FAR and throughout government. So I think that maybe the focus is these integrated project teams, not necessarily in addition to the contracting officers. And my understanding, and this probably needs to be confirmed, and I'm not sure if there's folks from GSA on the line who can confirm or deny this, but like the contracting officers and the contracting specialists are members of this integrated project team, along with the program managers, the requirements developers. So it is a team concept, and it's training the team on all of this. It's not training like one specific group. And so I'm pretty sure Leslie, when I joined, was talking about the new climate risk training. And that's an example where that training was developed with program managers in mind, but it's on FAI and DAU, and anyone can view it. And maybe that will be added as another recommended training for various curriculums across the federal government. So I do think that there's like some sort of matrix on who these people are, what they need to be trained on, and trying to, where it makes sense, use the same approach to train multiple groups.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. So Katie, I'm really curious about the climate risk and resilience plans that are going to be required for different suppliers. Is there a standard that's going to be used to assess these plans? Because in my mind, I'm asking, what sort of training do we need then? Are we expecting the workforce, the acquisition workforce, to interpret what's in there? Is this just a box checking exercise? What's CEQ thinking about this?
Yeah, so GSA has really taken the lead here. So in GSA's climate action plan, this is one of their key initiatives, and so they have more details in there, and that information is public. And there's also a link to several suppliers. One that I've seen is Verizon, and this dates back to 2016. Created a climate risk management plan as part of like the first pilot in this work stream. So that's to say that they've been doing it for many years, but I do think, to your point, that is a key question right now, and something that folks at GSA are working on. Is it binary? Did they submit the plan or not? Or is there a good plan or not, like a grading opportunity? Or like from where I said that the ideal is that decisions are made based on that. So here are my climate risks. I'm going to tell you about them, and then I'm going to change, or maybe the government will get to make a decision about changing something like this. Yeah. So for like, let's relocate the servers so they're not on the basement is one anecdote that I've heard. So
maybe we can connect with you to get some more information at a later point on what's happening within this space. But it does beg the question, how do these plans get assessed and by who? As someone who studies sustainability plans, I definitely understand there's a lot of variation in how these things are put together.
Yep, I put a big fat note on my notebook on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I can, Boris, share where the public information is located today. And then I think just to kind of expand the scope of what you all are working on, which is probably not very welcome, is like, there's also, let's train the procurement teams on how to evaluate them, but there's a huge need to train the suppliers on how to create a good plan in the first place. So that tension of like, do we put the burden on, not burden, but do we require the federal government employees to figure this out, or do we just focus on training the vendors and the suppliers?
Well, fortunately, Kristen Seaver here is in the room, and she's heading the industry subcommittee. So I'm glad she's hearing this conversation.
And as you pointed out, the evaluation part will get complicated because it's not as simple as saying 25% for small businesses. I mean, you made that point, so they really will have to look at that. Well, again, Katie, thank you so much. We appreciate you being really our first guest speaker, and we hope that you'll be willing to come back as we further the work of the subcommittee.
Great.
I appreciate you jumping in again last minute. So thank you, Katie.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch.
Great to
Great.
see you. Bye.
Right. So for our committee, I think the next item on the agenda was the discussion around our mission. And we wanted to keep it very simple. And we received some suggestions. I think, Anne, were you going to lead us in the discussion?
Yep, I think it was going to be you or me, Daryl, and I'm happy
Nicole,
to do it.
please.
Yeah.
Please.
So I put a link into the Google Doc. I can also pull it up and just share my screen. So I just want to thank everyone for chiming in and offering some really great thoughts here on the mission. Remember, our task was to think about the committee's mission at a high level, something that would cover all of the work that we undertake, recognizing the key priorities that we have been discussing in our earlier public meetings. And we received a couple of, actually there were 4 different mission statements that were advanced. We've heard back from a number of you indicating that this is the preferred, and we'll talk about that. And then later, or it was later in the day, that Kristen went to the Federal Register and was taking a look at the language there associated with our meeting. And the Federal Register actually provides some specific language about our committee as well that she thought was useful. I also think it's useful. So really, this is an open conversation about your thoughts on the mission. I think it makes sense to start with Anne's suggested language here at the top to help the acquisition workforce acquire goods and services in a manner that reduces negative impacts on the environment and promotes sustainability.
Yeah, and just one comment on that as people mull it over. First of all, I like all the suggestions. My thinking on this one was, one, I wanted to keep it simple, but I also wanted to add the piece in there around that reduces negative impacts on the environment, promotes sustainability. That may not be the right wording, but I felt like a good mission statement should have the overarching goal, sort of the broader reason why we're doing what we do. And so, in other words, if we're going to help them or support them, or why, towards what end. And so that was the spirit of sort of this mission statement. Keep it simple, but also tie what we're trying to do to a broader outcome.
My opinion is that was the strength of this statement, the focus on the end goal, reducing negative impacts.
Although so sometimes I get concerned that mission statements talk about the how, so they start to tell you how to do what it is you're trying to do. And what I liked about this is I like this one and the statement right below it, to help the acquisition workforce acquire. And I wanted to kind of merge the two, because I like the beginning of this one, but then in the second one, I like where it says sustainability considerations into federal acquisition decisions, without getting into impacts and how and the why. So I feel like you could merge these two into one simple sentence.
Can I offer one pushback on that? So I'd like the embedded into acquisition decisions, but it doesn't answer why. Why is that important? And that's what I was trying to get at, because we want to reduce the negative impact of the environment and promote sustainability. But open to other thoughts. Yeah, love to hear from other members of the subcommittee.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys, you're onto the right things. I agree, Darrell. I think we can combine those and keep both important things, the why, and I like embedding the considerations into acquisition decisions. So maybe we could start with a statement that the acquisition workforce will plays, a significant role in helping reduce negative impacts on the environment and promote sustainability through the acquisition decisions that they make. And, we're here to support them. I'm babbling a little, but I think you have the two good points are right there. It's like what they're going to do. That I like the second part because it really kind of speaks to their work and their role, and they can everyone can grab onto that, but then bring it back to the bigger why. So I think we could combine those two sentences well.
I mean, you might just take what Nicole's highlighting and tack it on to the end of the second one. Supporting their workforce in a manner that reduces, I'm sure that's wordy. Yeah, to reduce there. It's one thought.
And promote, right? And
Yeah.
promote sustainability.
Yeah.
Sorry, my light just went off.
Okay.
That works. That works for me.
Other feedback from the committee?
I like to help the acquisition workforce because supporting is, what does that mean? Supporting. So to help the acquisition workforce acquire.
So like to help GSA's workforce.
Acquire, because that's what we're doing. But just to support it, it just doesn't give the action there. Because what does support mean?
I don't think we should limit it to just GSA. It's not just GSA.
Yeah, the acquisition work.
Yeah.
Is that so, Boris? I mean, this is it's a question for GSA.
Yeah, so 2 points I offer. Yeah, this subcommittee lives within the context of the full committee, the GAFAC. So the work that you produce definitely fits into that. I think it's entirely okay to not have GSA, but just keeping in mind that the recommendations will go to the administrator of GSA. So when this committee produces a product, it goes to the GSA administrator. So just keep that in mind, but it is your decision what you think will frame the work that you all are going to do. So I think this is looking pretty strong, and I'm stepping out of my DFO roles. I used to facilitate these kind of meetings. But,
so if we broaden this out to the federal workforce, does that address your concern?
Yeah, and no concerns here. I don't know, Stephanie, if you wanted to weigh into, but I feel like, again, this is your all's call.
I didn't see who was speaking. Was it you, Gail, who weighed in?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we change this to federal.
Okay, federal workforce. Mm-hmm.
Federal acquisition, right?
Workforce.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'd urge you to remember the GSA administrator has authority over the GSA acquisition workforce. When we're talking the federal acquisition workforce, that's outside anything that the GSA administrator has direct authority. That's into Office of Federal Procurement Policy, that's into Office of Management and Budget. So while you can certainly address and make broader recommendations, where you have the most actual potential is in specific steps GSA should take. So if there's something you're going to say GSA should do to support the acquisition workforce, that's a framing to think about.
It's a good point, Jeff. I think it's a little bit of a balance, isn't it? Like everything you say is absolutely true. And the ultimate goal is that the entire acquisition workforce can leverage the good work of the subcommittee. So we can give that some consideration.
Okay, I say just in the interest of time, let's rest on this for a minute. And as we have more calls next week, we might can refine this a bit. But this is definitely something to work with. Can we all agree to that?
Yeah, and Darryl, this is Clyde. I had another suggestion too, but it was going in another direction. So I'm agree with you. What I'm trying to say, I just present that next Tuesday, but I send my comment to the group on the chat room, and I won't bring it up right now. I have it written here. I can pop it over to you, and you can just use it, and we can talk about it next week. I don't want to discuss it right now.
That's fine.
Okay, I just pop it over.
Okay,
Well,
great.
I think before you do that, if there's a
Too late.
key theme that you want to share that we have missed in this, I think it would be useful to hear.
But no, you didn't miss anything. But I was working on this before I got all the other comments, and then when I saw when I was reading right before the meeting, then I saw the other suggestions. Then I was going to hold back on mine, because what I did, I went to the GSA website and looked at its goals, and I just copied one of those. And they talked about acquisition, and then within the GSA goals, it said a acquisition, a modern, accessible, and streamlined acquisition ecosystem, and a robust marketplace connecting buyers to the suppliers and businesses. So I looked at that and then tried to key off of that. And so the statement I just sent you all was based on that. And
okay.
So we can discuss it more next week.
You're saying it's in the chat, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir. I just
innovating or supporting GSA's acquisition opportunities. Okay, I see it. I see it.
But that came off of one of the GSA goals that they already have printed.
Okay.
And again, I did that before I saw this.
Okay. So Nicole, if it's okay, I think we can just, like I said, sit with this draft for a minute.
Yes.
We can massage it, and next week during our administrative call, we can finalize it and we can present it at our next meeting.
I think that sounds terrific.
I do want to save some time for at least the last 30 minutes or so for questions from the people who are part of the public. I think we're pretty much on time.
Yeah, and at this point, so both you, Darryl, and Nicole, you can facilitate this. So you can offer people who would be interested, maybe by raising the hand, who are not members of the subcommittee, and then you guys can facilitate that discussion at this point. So, but I'll leave it up to you. So however much time you feel you would like to offer.
Great.
That sounds great. So would I see their hands raised on here, or?
I can see them in front of me.
Oh, okay.
So any questions? Yeah, Mark has a question.
Actually, Mark, you're a member of the subcommittee, so you can speak freely. You don't need to raise your hand.
You're not restricted to 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks for that. The comment I have is, when I was first going down the sustainability pathway per the governor's instruction to implement some sustainable procurements on some pricing agreements, I said I would love to go back to academia and start researching this myself, but I didn't have time. I did meet somebody at a career day at Arizona State University, and I had a chat and said, would you have a master's student that could give the state of New Mexico some assistance in putting together a sustainable program by researching best practices throughout the country? The response was, let me get back to you at the end of the week. She says, my entire class would love to help you. So I had quite the portfolio on best practices. And I think integrating our questions with the academic world would be really a way for us to network and leverage some of the institutional knowledge on best practices. So I throw that out there.
Oh, I'm sure you got the best at Arizona State.
It's a great point, Mark. I like it.
Mark, did you work with Shirley Ann Baravish?
I did, absolutely. She will probably remember me, and I definitely remember her.
Yes.
Okay, again, are there questions from the public? We'd like to open it up to hear your comments and concerns.
we want to provide space, and we have time to take your comments. Daryl, if we don't hear from anyone, we may want to move to the key priority discussion and keep the conversation going. But I'm very conscious of creating the space for the broader public to jump in.
Okay, seeing that there are none at the moment. Nicole, did you want to lead that discussion on the priorities?
Yeah, sure. At the very least, I can kick it off. So I moved what was in a PDF into a Google form, so that, or into a Google sheet. So we have some editing capabilities. You remember at our first public meeting, we brainstormed as a full committee around priorities for each of the subcommittees to consider. And the Acquisition Workforce Subcommittee, there were 7 particular priorities that were identified that are listed here. One of the things that I think we need to consider as a subcommittee is whether there are certain items on here that have greater priority than others. So that's the first topic for conversation. And then the second is, are there things here in light of what we've been hearing in our conversations amongst ourselves with the different experts? Are there things here that we are missing that should be included? So we have, about 25 minutes to really talk about some of these priorities and think about whether they should be grouped into high-level areas, mid-level areas, and whether there are other items that we should consider adding.
And to add to that, I also think we should be thinking of this in terms of an action plan. We have some time constraints, so we need to think about an action plan based upon what's achievable, from this list.
And potentially, if we develop, say, if we identify 3 critical priorities, the action plan would shake out of that. At least for our immediate responsibilities, it'll take us through spring. And then after spring, we can begin tackling some of the other issues.
Let me add a comment that might help in this conversation. So our next full committee meeting right now is planned for January 12th, so just a little over a month. And so what we're going to be looking for there, and we're going to share this with all of the subcommittees, is as a subcommittee, your recommendations into the areas that you want to tackle based on your conversations today. And then you're going to meet 2 other times before the January full committee meeting. So thinking about that just for the longer term. Okay.
I think that's important level setting for us, because it could be based on additional conversations that we have.
Correct.
Some of these priorities might shift.
Right.
So,
and I'm sorry, Daryl. And may I just add that if there is an additional submission, if you could put it in chat, if you don't want to vocalize it, it would be very helpful, because we can capture that and add that to the list.
okay,
I think something to consider, as I sit here and then I'm thinking about the industry partnership, and then I'm thinking about policy and listening to our speaker talk about kind of what's coming, like what's on the horizon. I'm just wondering if one of the priorities might want to focus around what is going to be that mechanism to get the acquisition workforce. And I liked what Katie said about that matrix. It's not just your procurement officials, but something about who needs to know what, when, based on this continuum of efforts going on around climate and sustainability. So I'm not sure there's a clear mechanism for that to happen, just listening to everybody talking.
I'm just going to add some notes here at the bottom of this document.
That was a really good point, Kristen. Like, that was another question I had for Katie. It was, and it probably wasn't a question for Katie, it's probably just a follow-up, but really understanding who needs to know what when. When you look at those 3 pillars, and what does it mean if you say there's reporting by federal contractors around emissions? walk me through what that looks like for a program manager, for a contracting officer, for a core. And that'll help me better understand what we need to do to support them.
Yeah, and maybe it's a very broad universe, and maybe one of the things we do is refine our focus around the core, like not the core officer, but like, okay, the most critical 3 to 5 people, job descriptions that are going to really help make this happen. What do they need now? You know, that'll be different than what they need in 3 years. And then the other thing I was just thinking about, I think one of the speakers said about it was, you know, it could be climate, it could be sustainability, it could be changes in regulations, new executive orders, but how do we create that mechanism where we can inject those things into the acquisition, training, and development kind of ethos program, how they do it, right? How they get new information, new requirements to the right people to kind of do the job, because the need to do the job doesn't stop. Like, it's not going to wait for these things to come out, right? It's ever evolving. So it's more of a problem. How do you keep up with what's changing and how that translates into knowledge, skills, and ability that an acquisition workforce needs? I'm getting overwhelmed just thinking about it.
Yeah, and it's kind of back to it's back to your previous point, like they may not even need to know.
Right.
And so how do we figure out who needs to know what, when, and how?
Yeah.
Would we get some of this from the other 2 committees?
I'm not sure. We'll have our meeting tomorrow, Dara.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think they have to interplay off each other, right? Because, yeah, we definitely heard that it's not just the acquisition workforce. The industry side of procurement has to keep up with it as well. I heard that loud and clear and took a note on that. And then, don't you think the recommendations coming out of the policy group are going to inform both our subcommittees, I think?
So I say that because we could remain somewhat broad, and as we hear back from the other committees, we can refine it a bit more. If you look at this list, number 2 seems to really stick out for me in terms of something that we should focus.
Well, thank you, Daryl. I believe that was written by me several months ago. That was my favorite too. No, actually, that was a great point. I was going to ask Katie if there was a country or some entity that had done a lot of great work in this area already, thinking through how do you incorporate in sustainable climate friendly practices into the acquisition workforce. As the UK is always 10 years ahead of us. Has the UK done it?
Or the European Union, I'm thinking, you know.
Yeah, EU, have they done that? Yeah, I think we can circle back with Katie. I'm happy to shoot her an email if she's aware of any countries that have done that.
But then I kept hearing in the presentation about the DOD and the DOD.
Yeah, DOD's done a lot. Yeah. Definitely think we should dig into DOD work, particularly around their strategic climate, sustainability, resilience contract.
Any other federal agency out there? You know, I'm thinking like the FAA or.
My understanding is that NASA is making some important inroads on the technological development. So if we think about different platforms that are needed to implement these different systems, NASA may be in a leading role in this place. And I see we have 20 minutes remaining. In looking at these priorities, I'd like to circle back around because I think that some are much more immediate and others are more long-term. Like, how can we best train university students? In my mind, this is a second-tier priority compared to some of the more immediate needs. That's number 5 here. Are there any others that we can identify as second-tier priorities?
Could you highlight that in yellow just so we know?
That's exactly where I'm headed. We're on the same page.
Oh yeah, I've heard about Sweden. I think number 4 and number 2 are very similar.
Yep, I was thinking the same thing.
So
So it may be that we integrate these two.
yeah.
Actually, I'm just going to do it right now.
I think it's a good idea. I also think, you know, number 1 might be a next step or a next phase item. You know, in thinking about Katie's comments, you know, she mentioned how that's a next level kind of activity. How do you get to determining it?
It's just things are evolving so fast. It's going to be a critical concern if the acquisition workforce is going to be receiving these climate action plans from suppliers. What do they do with them? How do they assess them? So I think advice that we provide on this is going to be pretty critical. I would be cautious about moving that to a second level priority. It gets to the notion of, you know, how do you measure what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? Or is it may be that it's a checkbox exercise.
Yeah, like, did they submit a plan? Check.
Yeah. Again, as someone who studies these issues, it makes me cautious to think that it's all about checking a box because there's so much variation.
Exactly.
Well, I think some of this is, you know, and not that we're going to solve it here today, but, you know, as we evolve with this, I mean, I think one of the key questions we do need to be asking, because it's so much information, is, you know, do we need to increase knowledge, or can we provide a tool? Right. So not everything might be training, and that's where some of these platforms to assess and analyze, Nicole, to your point, proposals that get you 3/4 of the way there. So, you know, the objective is to evaluate, equitably and against a standard or something. How we do that, you can train somebody to read it and check off those things. You might be able to have a tool that reads it, you know. So I think one of the things when we think about the acquisition workforce is always like, do we need to train them in something, or do we need to provide a tool to do something? Because the answer to those two things could change the direction on a solution.
I definitely agree. It could just be policy guidance is all that's needed.
Nicole, this is Clyde, and also we should consider, how does this affect the professional service organizations? For example, the service industry, the ones who provide accounting services, human resource services, IT services, all of the backroom operations to the federal government. We should think about how can those organizations comply, if the word is comply, or contribute to this effort also.
Clyde, you said something really important that I missed. What types of organizations?
The professional service organizations, the ones who provide the backroom operations to the federal government.
I've been trying to copy and paste Mark's comment, but for some reason I can't copy items in the chat. So I'm just going to put in here Sweden as a case.
Okay. And I'll write the question up again and send it to you.
Okay.
We are capturing the chat, so we can definitely send those out later. So.
Should we take a moment here and again see if there are any comments from the public? Okay.
Before we move on, Daryl, I want to encourage the committee to think about, especially these 5 items, the ones that we have not yet said that's definitely second tier. I think because each of these are important to ask, are there subtleties, distinctions, other things we need to bring out here? Are we comfortable with what's here? And then maybe we can use this, Daryl, as one of the items to finalize in our next public meeting.
Number 5, could that be a next step item? I mean, thinking about new technologies. Again, I'm, you know, when we talk about the workforce readiness, it seems like the literacy part might need to be prioritized over technology.
You might remember in our first public meeting, I think it was Michael Bloom, who presented on SF Tool. This really amazing, robust technology that already exists and already lives, but it's not getting used, in part because individuals aren't connecting with it. The training still needs to be rolled out. So we actually have examples of tools that are out there, but we need to think about the next step in order to get them embedded into acquisition decision-making.
Got it. Okay. Well, if there are no comments and there are no other comments from the committee, Boris, Stephanie, I think we've done what we can do today.
I would like to take a moment and thank everyone. This was a really good conversation. And I think that the speakers, is Ann still here? It looks like Ann may have signed off. The speakers were really terrific. We actually, no, there she is. There she is, I see her. They have certainly given me a lot to chew on. I can only imagine that others feel the same way. It's like the can of worms is slowly starting to open up. And we're discovering the magnitude of what we're going to be managing, but at least from where I sit, it's really exciting. And I'm thrilled to be working with all of you to figure this out.
And Boris, is it possible for us to have the PowerPoint that Katie, is that going to be part of our?
Right, yeah, and I'll talk to that. Before that, Troy, who is our chair of the full committee, Troy, if you wanted to just say a word, this is definitely an opportunity for you to do so.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I'm joining you here from my messy basement. Apologies, but yeah, this has just been a fantastic meeting, a great kickoff to all of our subcommittee meetings on such an important topic. Thank you, Daryl and Nicole, for your leadership. And thank you for helping to organize also the agenda for today. Those of you who know me know the acquisition workforce is one of my passions. I never ever would have expected I would be saying that, but when I went back to the Hill in 2005 to join the Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee, I had been hired on the committee, I think based more on my expertise in international issues. But in the week when I was on vacation before I started my job, Hurricane Katrina hit. And the day I started, the whole committee staff on a bipartisan basis was organized to do an investigation of the problems that the government was having in responding to Katrina and all, the pain that was causing the people who were impacted by it. And they needed someone to look at contracting issues. And I thought that sounded just really interesting and volunteered to take on that issue. And from there, just kind of, expanded my portfolio on the committee related to acquisition. Was fortunate enough to work with Ann, which she was there, and also with Leslie and the excellent team at OFPP. And then of course, then I went to GSA. So I'm a super geek about all of this. I could talk all day about the acquisition workforce and just, one of my prides from when I was in the Senate on the committee is like we had a small bipartisan group, and especially with our committee and the Armed Services Committee, to really rebuild the acquisition workforce, because it had been somewhat decimated in the 90s and into the early 2000s. So this is so important. You can pass all the laws you want, you can enact all the policies you want, but if you don't have the people who are capable and empowered to implement all of that, you don't get anything done. So this subcommittee is just so key to what we're trying to do. So I just really think this was just such an excellent kickoff, and I'm so glad I got to be here to observe. I'll just note that my co-chair Cassius Butts and I plan on observing as many subcommittee meetings as we can, so that we can kind of try to connect the dots across the subcommittees, and then just kind of help roll things up as they come to full committee. So pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to the future meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Yeah, appreciate your comments. And we are drawing near, so just a couple of admin things. Again, I echo Troy's comments. A really fantastic kickoff to subcommittee conversations. You're missing a couple of members. David Malone from the city of St. Petersburg, he was on travel today, and I believe Steve Squinter is teaching. So those were your only two that you were missing today. Wanted to say that going forward, we're going to meet every other week at the same time, and then there's going to be more. I believe, Nicole, you were having another speaker come, another somebody in your network that you had identified as well. And if you want to say a word about that.
Yeah, a couple of things, and we can discuss this at our next administrative meeting. And I do want to get that on your calendar. It's I think Adam is literally going to put it on your calendar. But in the off weeks of our public meetings, we're going to be hosting 1-hour administrative meetings. The next one then will be on December 13th. Yeah. So the speaker that we were proposing to come and talk with us on the 20th was Holly Elwood from EPA. And because she has been responsible for leading the conversation related to EPA's standards, eco-labels, and other mechanisms that Katie was discussing today. And this gets to the how do we help the federal acquisition workforce. She's also been deeply involved with Michael and Bloom's efforts on SF Tool, and was one of the key individuals who helped engage in developing the language in the current proposed FAR. So she's sitting at a level and connecting a lot of dots in a way that I think would be quite useful for this committee to hear. So with your permission, I would be delighted to reach out to her and get this on her calendar.
Yep, yeah, your subcommittee can certainly do that, your call. One clarification, administrative meetings are closed to the public, and this is really to prepare for a solid subcommittee meeting that's open to the public. So just wanted to put that out there, just for subcommittee members. So close to the public, just because we are preparing for the following. So just wanted to clarify. We do have two other subcommittees that are starting. One tomorrow, industry partnerships, and the other one on Thursday, which is policy and practice. So Christine and Farag get the front row seat tomorrow and get a start on the conversations on industry partnerships. We will be posting the presentations, and we're also going to post a recording of this meeting on our website. There is a sub-page for each subcommittee, so we're going to see those materials. So those websites are going to get pretty filled with a lot of information. So we're going to put all of those out there. Daryl, go ahead.
So before you adjourn, I want to just follow up what Nicole said. If there are other speaker suggestions, would you please submit those? And that includes, you recall we talked about even the GSA acquisition workforce employees, if we can get them. We'd like to hear from the people on the front line who are doing this work. So let's try to line up our speakers over the next few weeks so they can get it in their schedule and it won't, without them having conflicts.
I think that sounds great. And you all have access to the Google Doc that has lists of potential speakers. Go ahead and drop them in there. And Daryl, let's make a note to discuss this at our next administrative meeting, how we might line up speakers in the new year.
Perfect.
Yep, that's perfect reason for an admin meeting. Exactly. Great. We are just at the time here. And Stephanie, I'll open it up to you in case I missed anything, because I've had a lot of things today. So.
No, Boris, I don't think you missed anything. I just want to say and echo that this was a wonderful discussion, very informative. I also want to thank the public, those who are listening in from the public, and just to state that if you didn't make a comment here today, please know that you can make a written comment or statement through regulation.gov, and we're happy to hear from you. Thank you so much.
All right, perfect. Well, with having all that said, I'm just about ready to adjourn this meeting. And thanks everybody for joining in today. I'm looking forward to our next gathering.
Yeah, and thanks again, Anne, for helping speakers for today.
Thanks to you and Daryl for leading this. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Stephanie, can you stay?
Let's end the recording real quick.